My next update is about something much in the news these days, Mexico, and the relationship between the United States and Mexico, and Mr. Trump's literally never-ending effort to heap every kind of blame he can on the Mexican people, on the Mexican government, on Mexico, as if it were the big problem for the United States. It never was, it isn't now. This is a game, a distraction. But let's look at what Mr. Trump proposes for you to see just how much of a fakery this all is. Let's begin by assuming that Mr. Trump and the Republican Congress can actually carry through on the problems and the threats as they see them. Apparently, Mr. Trump has issued the order to build a wall. Apparently, he's going to go through with tariffs, blocking the freedom of the Mexicans to produce goods cheaply there and sell them into the United States, which they have been doing without paying any duty, because that's what the NAFTA arrangement passed in 1994 allows them. Let's suppose it all stops, that American companies can't or won't produce cars in Mexico. They'll produce them instead here in the United States, and that's what Mr. Trump says is his goal. Well, let's follow the logic. If you produce cars in the United States instead of Mexico, here's one problem you immediately have if you are Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, or any other company. You're going to have to pay American wages. You're going to have to pay American wages that are significantly higher than the wages you can get away with in Mexico, which is why those companies went to Mexico. Not only that, you are now going to face the reality that you have a competition, if you're an American company that's moved your production back into the United States. You're going to be competing around the world with Japanese companies and South Korean companies and French companies and German companies and Italian companies who are not being forced by their respective governments to do anything of the sort. They will continue to produce cars in Mexico, thank you very much, picking up the laborers that Americans fire down there and producing cars that they can sell at a much lower price and still make a profit because they are paying Mexican workers so much less. So around the world, where the United States might have thought that they could sell cars, they can't, because they can't compete since they've been excluded from producing cars in Mexico. And by extension, Mr. Trump seems to want to prevent that production abroad from happening in China and other countries, so we can expect it to continue. That's going to force American companies, pressured to produce here in the United States, either to price their cars where they can't sell them. And by the way, that means pricing cars much higher than they now are, because you've got to pay American-level wages. But note two things. Wages in the automobile sector have been coming down because of the crisis of the auto industry. So they don't have to produce cars, pay wages what they once did to American workers. So the impact on the American economy won't be that big. But if it is, if it really prices American cars produced in America at a price that's uncompetitive, then we know what corporations will do. They will substitute machines for people. That's how they'll try to compete. That's how capitalism works. They'll automate. And in the world of automobile production, that means robots. They will replace workers with robots and thereby achieve, they hope, the economies that will allow them to compete with folks that are still producing in Mexico using the low wages. So whatever jobs they might have created here will not, in fact, be created because of robots. And here comes the best part. The world market in robots is dominated, get ready, by Chinese and Japanese producers. So the American car companies will likely be importing Chinese and Japanese robots to remove American workers. I could go on, but Mr. Trump hasn't thought any of that through and clearly hopes we don't either, so that the TV or made-for-TV spectacular of doing something to the Mexicans is supposed to make us believe that all of this will work out for working people. It hasn't. There aren't any working people involved in any of this. The few workers who cheer this are fooled by Mr. Trump into not investigating what this all means. Nor am I done. What will happen also is that Mexico may very well be plunged into an unlivable situation. There, the combination of American companies shutting down or even just not coming at the pace that they have been coming in the past means fewer jobs for Mexicans. In the wall that is to be built also means that you're shutting off, perhaps to a significant degree, the flow of desperate Mexicans into the United States. Let's put those together. Fewer jobs for an economy already in trouble, and no escape in the form of migration to where the jobs might be in the United States. And let's suppose this is pursued for several years. Mexico is already an unstable society. Millions of Mexicans cannot find work in a real economy and so turn to all kinds of illegal businesses, including the drug trade. Do we really want on our southern border a society in disintegration? We can blame it on them all we want, but what Mr. Trump's proposals amount to is a direct, serious aggravation of an already unstable society. And I won't go into the imagery and the symbolism. A wall, like the Berlin Wall maybe, where desperate people will try to find a new life the way immigrants have always to the United States, but this time there'll be a war and there'll be people shooting at them in case they try to climb over it. Yes, every day in the newspaper, pictures. Really? This is a way to solve your problems? Wow. And speaking of solving problems, President Trump also removed the United States from the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. What an interesting idea. This is part of the notion that the problems of America are about globalization, about the movement of capitalists around the world. Sure, that's part of the problem. But that's only a part, and if you shut that down, you're not solving anything. Let's suppose we have a great transition from globalization to what President Trump calls America First. Let's remember that globalization, we were told, would solve all our problems. It would be the best thing in the world. It would help everybody. It would be a win-win. You remember all of that? We now understand that was a hustle. Globalization, like every policy within capitalism, has winners and losers, and it's usually the winners who are capitalists and the losers who are workers. To believe that that basic story will change when we go from a globalization policy to an America First policy bespeaks an extraordinary naivete. Look at the people Mr. Trump has chosen to do his policy. It's the richest collection of billionaires ever to be in a cabinet. These are people with long histories of anti-worker automation, anti-worker policy, anti-worker pricing. What are we doing? Expecting them suddenly to change their colors? Folks, get real. This is a fight among capitalists. Some benefit by globalization a bit more than others. Some benefit by America First a bit more than others. Mr. Trump represents a group who want to go to America First. He's made a lot of common cause with people who say they don't even agree with that. They'll fight it out. And the only thing we know for sure is that the working classes who were shafted in the one system are scheduled to get the same treatment in the other. These are struggles that working people do not belong in worrying about. Our problem is a system that tends to screw the mass of workers. no matter what the governing government's policy is. What you can be sure is they cannot and will not fundamentally frustrate the capitalist class, because that's what put them in power. They can and will support that class, pander to that class, and if that costs the mass of working people, then so be it. That's been the policy of every other political cabal at the top of the system. There is absolutely no reason, looking at the folks gathered around Mr. Trump, to imagine it'll go any other way. Let me turn to the next major topic for today that you've asked me about. The question of jobs. Some of you have said to me, well, isn't it good that President Trump is fixated on getting more jobs for Americans and putting them back to work and all of that? And isn't it therefore even worthwhile listening to him when he justifies restarting those pipelines in the Midwest that so many have protested against, and uses as one of the justifications for doing this environmentally disastrous thing, this thing that abuses our long, sad history with indigenous Americans and so on? He justifies it by saying it will create jobs. This is something that has to be confronted in a direct way. Are we supposed to listen to presidents and other politicians telling us that the only way we can get jobs for Americans is to pander to one or another capitalist? Because that's really what we're being told. We're being told we have to pander to the pipeline companies that want to make a fortune off of building those pipelines, because that's the way to get jobs. We have to go with Mr. Trump to destroy Mexico and all that the Mexican workers need and want, because that will help us have jobs. We have to, you get the picture. We justify things in the United States by saying it'll get jobs. President Obama did the same thing. In the crisis years of 2009 and 10, at the beginning of his presidency, he pushed through the Congress a massive stimulus program. He gave huge amounts of money to all kinds of construction companies and other companies to invest in things paid for by government money. And when asked, well, why did you give it to those big companies, those rich politicians and bankers and so forth? Because the mass of people need it more. He explained, this will create jobs. He justified trickle-down economics, which is what he practiced, by saying it would eventually produce jobs. This is a peculiar logic, because if you want to produce jobs, if you're genuinely interested in jobs, there's a quick, easy, direct way to do that. And every politician knows it, but they want you not to think about it. How do we do it? Well, let me give you an example of an American president who did it. Franklin Roosevelt, in the depths of the Great Depression, looked around the United States, saw a basic problem of unemployment, and acted directly. Here's how he did it. He went to the richest Americans, the big corporations and the wealthy people. He taxed a good bit of money from them. He borrowed a good bit of money from them, and he used that to hire unemployed Americans to do all kinds of useful things. They built many of the national parks that most Americans visit one point or another in their lives. They did some of the first reclamation projects, the first ecological preservation projects in America. They built countless buildings and bridges and roads. They did useful things that we're still benefiting from. And they had good jobs and good incomes. You want to hire people? Do that, because that worked real well. There is no need to go through the private sector, to make profits for the private sector, and then justify it with jobs. That's fakery. This is not about a jobs program. Opening those pipelines is a gift to the pipeline companies. Doing what he's doing with the Mexicans is a gift to the companies that will benefit from doing that. Justifying it with jobs is an awful fakery, because it's not about jobs. If you actually cared about jobs, you wouldn't take those routes. Let's be real honest here. If we have a war, a trade war with Mexico, which is sure what it looks like, Mr. Trump has told us not only is he going to build the wall, but the Mexicans are going to pay for it. The Mexican president has said that will never happen, and he threatens retaliation, which, by the way, all governments around the world will seriously consider. Retaliation means if they can't sell Mexican-produced goods in America, Americans will not be able to sell them in Mexico, and that means the loss of many American jobs. So if you're really concerned about jobs, you wouldn't go in this direction. It's too risky, it's too dangerous, and there are not enough jobs at the end of this process. Why are you doing this? If you care about jobs, provide them. Follow what Roosevelt did. Do it that way. It's been done before in America. It worked before. And all of these indirect methods promise much poorer results if they even get those. We should not permit the ideology to govern us, that as if the only way to discuss providing work is whether we take this policy of confrontation with other countries, or we let the environment be destroyed, or what are we doing here? Drilling in the Arctic? We don't have to do that for jobs. That's a fake argument, and you shouldn't be fooled. And if you're wondering what would millions of Americans who got federal jobs do, let me give you a short list. We have major American cities that are wrecks. The housing stock is a wreck. The infrastructure is a wreck. I'm talking about Detroit and Cleveland and Camden, New Jersey, my hometown, Youngstown, Ohio, and many others. There's lots of work to be done. Here, I'll give you another example. Instead of befouling the environment with fossil fuels, why don't we green the American economy? Many have proposed that. Do something about the environment that we've spoiled so badly over the first 2 centuries of this country's history. Give a lot of people work doing something everybody will be healthier for, that will save this planet. There's more work to be done than you can imagine. And here's another. Put a lot of Americans to work helping other people around the world, not threatening them with trade wars, not screaming America first in their faces. No, doing something useful for them that will be good for this country too, in the way of goodwill, in the way of solidarity. There's lots that can be done that Americans would be proud to be employed to do. If you care about employment, you would have done it directly because it's the fastest, quickest, and best way for us. The pandering instead to projects that make money, profits for corporations, and then hope it trickles down to jobs, that's been a recipe for inequality and failure over and over again. I was sad during the Obama administration, with all of that unemployment, that there never once was a massive march in Washington or anywhere else for jobs. Not jobs through the private sector, jobs now, for people who need them now, for communities that need those people working now, for families that can only hold together if the adults in them get a job now. But no, this country of family values, don't you know, never put it together that family values means giving mama and papa, the adults, a job and an income that allows you to have a family and allows you to have a future. No. When you hear justification for something in terms of its being a job creator, you're hearing a hustler. Someone who wants you to believe in the jobs precisely because what's being done is not directly creating a job, but in fact, directly creating somebody's profit. That's how capitalism works. That's why the system is the problem. Lastly, some of you have said to me, is it really fair to say something like this, that Trump represents what's good for capitalists and not what's good for workers, no matter what he says? Well, rather than make the argument again, as I've done, I thought I'd read you a few statements made by leading capitalists at the recently concluded Davos meetings of the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. And these are taken from the Bloomberg News Service that wrote them up. I picked two because I think they're wonderful. The first one comes from the CEO at J.P. Morgan Asset Management. J.P. Morgan, one of the largest banks in the world and in the United States. The CEO of J.P. Morgan Asset Management is Mary Callahan Erdos, E-R-D-O-E-S. Here's what she said in Davos, quote, "It's going to be a great several years. It's going to be very positive for businesses in the U.S., which should cascade to businesses around the world." Wow, this is double trickle down. Trump is good for U.S. businesses, and that'll trickle down to other businesses. And then, although she doesn't care to say anything, it'll trickle down to everybody else. Mary Callahan Erdos is very happy about Trump. Next, Goldman Sachs, the biggest investment bank in the United States. The CEO there is named Lloyd Blankfein. And here's what he offered in an interview on Bloomberg television from Davos, Switzerland, where he was. Here we go. Quote, "If you look at the policies that Trump has committed himself to, they are quite stimulative and quite market supportive. If you look at spending on infrastructure, lower tax rate, and overlapping regulation, they are quite stimulative. Far more stimulative than what people were expecting had the Democrats won the election. I think we're going to open it up," Mr. Blankfein said, and final quote, "You can call it Dodd-Frank as amended." These are happy capitalists, and they should make you wonder.